Hey there, astrology lovers. How you doing? So today we've got the full moon in Taurus at 13 degrees 23 in the sign of Taurus. It's happening today in literally just under an hour. I tried to record this last night from my little studio in Portugal in Europe. And, just as I was recording, this massive storm came in from the Atlantic Ocean and there was thunder and lightning and there was no way I could do any recording at all. We've now got these record waves coming in, I think 9-meter waves, about to crash into the shore. Very, very stormy times ahead. And it's not completely unheard of at the time of the full moon. Obviously, the full moon is known to stir the tides. The moon phases are linked in with the tides and how things are working. And of course, this is, I think, an earthly terrestrial representation of what might go on in terms of our emotions. We get stirred up at the time of the full moon. So I don't know how you're feeling right now. I know I'm feeling a bit stirred. So this is happening at 13 degrees 23 in the sign of Taurus. Now, the reason I'm recording this, even though it might seem a little nuts, why would you record something just as it's happening? It'll be out of date really quickly. But I think the degree that a full moon or a new moon or an eclipse occurs in is a special point that carries weight until the next moon cycle comes in. Maybe the next new moon, it's definitely important until then. And I also think it's still essentially a full moon degree until the next full moon comes in. So, we've got the power of it playing out over the next 2 weeks for the very minimum. Now, in this video, what I'm going to do is look at the actual full moon chart, but also talk about what's just in front of it, like what happens leading up to the full moon that we're in right now, and then what happens with the moon immediately after. Because I do also think, a bit like if you're using tofu, it captures in the tastes of all of the different ingredients around it. I think the full moon's the same. It's going to really pick up and run with the rest of the planetary picture. So what I'm going to do in this video is analyze the planetary picture, give you some real heads up as to what you might be facing, what you might be working with, what you might be releasing even, because the full moon, yes, it's a time of culmination, big fat moon, but it's also a time of getting ready to release. After this full moon, we're coming into a waning moon phase. That's our nudge from the cosmos that it's time to say enough. Let's let go. Let's start to let go and see what we're going to drop away. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. On top of this, in this sort of examination, I'm also going to be looking at the asteroid picture that is also aligning with this full moon. So I use serenu.com, SERENNU.com, to see which asteroids are working in a conjunction, opposition or square to this full moon. And I'm also going to have a look at the Sabian symbols of the sun and the moon. So by the end of this, you'll have a really, really good idea of what the prevalent themes are. And, if they resonate in your life, you'll know that, that story is really relevant right now. That one less so. So let's see what's going on. And maybe you already know where this is landing in your chart. I think it's worth exploring. This one is right slap bang, like literally within a degree of my descendant. So yes, it seems very, very relevant for me right now. If you're new to this channel, by the way, my name is Louisa Tannemunson. Hi and welcome. So let's bring up my charts. So as you can see, it's at 13 degrees 23 in the sign of Taurus. You can see up there's the moon down there. This is the chart from a London perspective, by the way. I set this chart for London just because it represents the midpoint of of the whole world in terms of time. And we've got the sun, as ever, is always exactly opposite the moon at the time of the full moon from our perspective, astrologically. So it's at 13 degrees 23 in the sign of Scorpio. So if you've got something around that, in Scorpio or Taurus, you're likely to get really, you're likely to pick up the theme of it in quite a strong way. It's always worth seeing what house it's falling in alongside your chart. If you've got, say, 13 degrees in the sign of Aquarius or Leo, you'll also be really feeling that, because whatever is here or here will be in a square to the sun and the moon, and that can really feel quite uncomfortable. So yeah, absolutely worth having a look at these. But the fixed signs, so we've got Taurus, Leo, Scorpio and Aquarius, they will really pick it up, and it's kind of challenging, it's arresting, it's kind of in your face. These particular signs, they will be challenged to work with the energies right now to see what needs to be shifted and what needs to be ultimately let go of. You could also ask yourself, let's widen the search a little bit, if you've got something, say from 7 degrees in those signs to maybe 19 degrees, 20 degrees, so 7 to 20 degrees, that seems wide, but each of those would, in the sign of Taurus, Leo, Scorpio or Aquarius, would either be in a square, a conjunction or an opposition to the moon. So yeah, that's on my watch list. Now, alternatively, you might have something in a fellow earth sign around, 10 to 16 degrees, and you'll have this lovely earth trine to the moon. And so it's a much gentler release, and it can go quite gracefully without too much personal struggle. It can feel like a really warranted release. It can feel quite good. So yeah, it's always worth considering how this is laying out in your chart. So one of the things I noticed about this is the full moon is in a trine to the south node and the sun is in a trine to the north node. So these particular positions of the sun and the moon are really working with our karma. The moon here, the full moon, is really associating with what's in the past and what you might want to move into the past. And the sun and the sun's current position is really aligned to what you're moving towards. So that's also something that might help you if you're looking at this from the perspective of your chart. Coming into this full moon, we've actually got Mars going into an exact opposition with Uranus, and you can see it down here. There's Mars and there's Uranus, and they are literally at 0 degrees between the Sagittarius and the Gemini polarity. So yeah, we've got this kind of polarity picture going on. You can see it here. So we've got the full moon, and then we've got Uranus and Mars in opposition exactly. Now that's not the only opposition, because you can also see Mercury is in opposition to Uranus. Uranus is an outer planet, and it's associated with change, surprises, shocks. It can really create chaos because it's so shocking, and it absolutely works with currents. It's a planet that I associate with channeling. That sort of electric impulse that you get, or this sudden download, something that just feels, whoa, there's something going on. I really think it affects our fields of energy around us. And so it's interesting as well that Mercury and Uranus are already in an existing opposition, I think really challenging what we know versus what we're channeled, like what's our narrative versus what is received by us. And then we've also got Mars in opposition to Uranus. Now, Mars and Uranus, what they share is this kind of explosiveness. Mars, when he's prompted, can be highly explosive. So again, if you've got something between 0 and 5 degrees in the sign of Sagittarius, or 0 and 5 degrees in the sign of Gemini, this full moon is also going to really capture your imagination and quite possibly a short temper, because this, Mars and Uranus is just so fiery and absolutely ready just to pop off at the moment's notice. It's not the only opposition. We've got loads of oppositions actually at the time of this full moon. We've also got Venus and Chiron in an opposition. Thankfully, it's already been at its most exact point, and Venus is slowly moving out of it, but it still is in an opposition. And we've also got another opposition between Jupiter and Pluto. Now, this is quite wide at the moment. We're feeling it, but it's quite wide. So we've got these feelings of wanting to be sovereign to our family versus wanting to be associated with our group collective feeling, you know, so like sovereignty versus a wide governmental framework. You know, this is like a family framework versus a public and global framework. So there are tensions around this. You know, Venus in Libra is all about connections and feelings, and Chiron in Aries is where we identify with our pain. And so there's quite a few different pain points going on here, plus a short temper, and then this full moon. I mean, it really is quite a spicy one. Then we've got a water grand trine between Jupiter, Mars, and also Saturn and Neptune. Now, I think this is quite helpful, actually, though I do recognise that Jupiter, Saturn and Mars seem to work very, very well together in terms of military action, because you've got the Mars energy, you know, the energy to create change, the Saturn energy, which is the authority, and then the Jupiter energy, which is expansion. So I do think in this current political climate, we might find that during this time of full moon upset, when people are maybe diverted, you know, their attention is diverted to other things, in particular very strong, you know, personal things, that there might be other stuff flowing in right under our nose that we're not quite aware of. That's obviously at a high level society, you know, from a societal basis. But if we're looking at this in terms of our own life, we can really make some big changes with this, even though, you know, technically Mars is ever so slightly into the sign of Sagittarius by this point. You know, the other points are in water. So we've got this water fire. It's a really sort of motivating a grand trine. You know, Jupiter and Mars working in a trine together is really raising our confidence to get things done, especially now Mars is in Sagittarius. And Mars in Sagittarius is particularly campaigning and pioneering, and it really stands up for what it believes in. And then with this Saturn and Neptune kind of bringing heaven to earth, and also being highly idealistic and ideological, to me this is like holy crusades going on, or crusades of consciousness. And, you know, when we apply it to a real sort of personal level, I really think, you know, whatever is capturing us, whatever ideological ideas we've got going on, you know, anywhere where we feel really called to stand for something, I really think we can make some changes. However, I do think it is a time to really pick what you're going to pioneer for, and to realise that any time we stand firm and say this is how it is, we're creating a reaction somewhere else. You know, so anyone that doesn't agree with you and you're saying this is what it is, they may well feel very challenged. And of course, then we're activating the opposition between Chiron and Venus, where we feel disconnected from people, and also activating the Jupiter and Pluto opposition, where we might feel you know, very diametrically opposed, you know, if they are wanting something global to your personal vision. So yeah, there's a lot of movement. Things can really take shape at the moment, if we can really keep our eyes on what we really want to focus on, and also recognize that there's resistance. You know, if we are announcing things with a sense of this is how it is, there's likely to be a lot of resistance from people. So I do think we need to be a bit more gentle, you know, which is really picking up more on the water picture that's going on. We've also got this separating grand square involving Pluto and Jupiter and their opposition, and Chiron and Venus in their opposition. Now, this is starting to disband. You know, Venus is now starting to move out of the square. I mean, she's still in the square, you can see here, but over the next few days, she's going to be moving out of this, and then she will start to move into a square with Pluto. But, you know, she is the component that's going to come out of this. This grand square has been going on in a different guise. You know, this is the base part of it. We've had Mercury in this point. We've had Mars in this point. We've had the Sun in this point. Finally, Venus is going to break this. So whatever has been going on really this autumn, or if it's spring where you are, this spring, in this latest season, whatever has been going on for you is an underlying theme where you have felt very caught between your sovereign ideals, this feeling that there is an overreach, and also where you recognize your own personal hurts and loss. I think it's been triggered again and again and again and again, which is why I also think this full moon is carrying so much promise, but also so much maybe like hidden pain, stuff that we've been trying to hide, we've been trying to ignore. And, with this, what I'm really seeing here is that we are in a tight corner. Right now Venus is here, and it's like we've got our back to the corner, and it feels like there's nowhere else to go. How are we going to get out of this? So to me, it feels like there's an element of facing what's been going on at the time of this full moon. And as we face things, there will be a certain amount of change. We've also got a finger of fate, or a yod as it's known, and it's pointing right at Venus in the last couple of degrees in the sign of Libra. Neptune and Uranus at the base. Neptune is all about our illusions and what where we might be deluding ourselves. Neptune's just at the very last degree of the whole zodiacal story. And then we've got Uranus retrograde. He's about to go into Taurus but hasn't quite got there yet, but he's at 0 degrees in the sign of Gemini. And so this feels like there is a very imminent sense of change, like real change in terms of what we think about in terms of comfort, which is a really big theme of this full moon. And also where we might have lied to ourselves and told ourselves a story that maybe got us so far, but maybe we're starting to rewrite our stories. But isn't it interesting that it's pointing towards Venus? Compassion and forgiveness, I think, is the way forward. So, if we go back to just focusing on the full moon itself, what have Scorpio and Taurus got in common? Well, I always think, this is about values. Taurus is the second sign of the zodiac, and as such, it has a flavour of like resources and the things that we have at hand that we can play with in a very sort of physical way. It really talks about comfort and food and our security. Taurus is a sign that really reveres security. Interestingly, Taurus is ruled by Venus, and Venus is where the yod is pointing, and she's very strong at the moment in the sign of Libra. I mean, she couldn't get any more feminine if she tried right now. So the idea of comfort and beauty, the idea of serenity and peace and grace are all real themes with this full moon. And so one of the things we might be asking ourselves is, how can we experience more grace? How can we experience grace and peace in a time of real disruption? How can we maintain the status quo? How can we feel calm in ourselves? Now, I recognise if my family listen to this, they might burst out laughing because I've felt my temper really shorten just literally in the last 6 hours. I kind of felt very much like I lost it. I've got Scorpio ascendant, my husband's got Scorpio moon, I've got 2 Scorpio suns, we've got a lot of personal energy here in the sign of Scorpio in opposition to this full moon. So we're really feeling it. And, it's so funny that I'm saying, can we tune into grace and ease and peace so that we can experience more physical comfort and also more spiritual comfort? The sun in Scorpio is really pushing us to redefine, I would say, that sense of power. Scorpio is it's the 8th sign of the zodiac, and I do think the signs of the zodiac, they're not the same as the houses, but like the 8th sign has a resonance with the 8th house. I do agree with that. There are some similarities, and one of the things I notice with the 8th house in general is that it is a place where we get pushed. We get really pushed beyond our limits, and we face our shadow side. When we think about it, people say about the 8th house, it's a place of death and taxes and sex, and it's all the stuff that you don't talk about on a first date. It's all the stuff you don't talk about when you meet somebody new, like, oh, hello, I like to be taken from behind, or whatever it is you're going to say, or, oh yeah, I don't pay my taxes, whatever it is. But, you don't go to those topics necessarily. The 8th house shows where we might have some guilt or shame or embarrassment, where we might have hidden resentments, where, we pretend to be this like people pleaser and we might keep it a little bit hidden. And then, we come into Scorpio season and it all gets churned up. But what is Scorpio really working towards? I think it's really working towards a deeper trust in the people around you. It doesn't feel like that, but the Scorpio test, if you know someone with a strong Scorpio motif in their chart, you'll know that they test you. The Scorpio energy will test to see if you can be trusted, to see if you're loyal, to see if it's okay to really crack open that Scorpio exoskeleton and see if it's okay to like really trust somebody. And so, this full moon is really bringing up the vulnerability. And of course, if it's bringing up this vulnerability, how can you be at peace with yourself and with others, even if they're pushing you, even if they're pushing you so much, even if you're pushing them, even though if it feels like you're being pushed, your back's against the wall. And really what this is doing, I think, is helping us take the next step into intimacy. Scorpio is absolutely known as a sign of greater intimacy. And I think not many people reach those levels of intimacy because like we pull up our drawbridge, we don't let people get that close to us. But this full moon, yes, it could create some upset in the meantime, but is it going to help you lower your drawbridge? Is it going to help you connect to people? This yod with Venus is suggesting actually we can get there. We can use this. We can absolutely see what's going on in our psychology and the psychology of people around us. And maybe we can get some very, very clear conversations. Now, these are two fixed signs. So like they're not known necessarily for caving or backpedaling. They do tend to stand firm. So it might take a while. But this is a very sort of dynamic shift we're going through. Now, if we also consider that the next move after this, the moon is going to be coming into a sextile with Jupiter, which can absolutely enliven your sense of commitment to people around you, the people that you love. And then the moon will come into a conjunction with Uranus. And as that's happening, Uranus is preparing to come into the sign of Taurus. It's like they're meeting right at the edge. And so I really think whatever's going on at the time of the full moon is also bringing in Uranus back into the sign of Taurus. Like, what are you learning about the very real turmoil that happens when you do peace, but you don't do it like the deep peace? Like what happens if you've just been peaceful on the surface, but not really allowing yourself to find the deeper peace? I think as Uranus comes back here, we're going to be challenged to do that. So I do think this full moon in many ways is like the homework before Uranus comes back in. Let's have a look now at the asteroids and what's playing out there. Actually, no, let's go to the Sabian symbols. So I don't know if you've been to Linda Hill's amazing website called sabiansymbols.com. I highly recommend it. I could not possibly recommend it enough. In fact, sometimes when I'm working with clients, sometimes when you check out the Sabian symbol for a particular planet or a point that seems to be part of the story that's being told, all of a sudden the Sabian symbol really opens up the chart in a magnificent way. Essentially, there are 360 degrees in our zodiac as our zodiacal wheel, and each of those degrees has a channeled message, and these messages were channeled over 100 years ago, and they've been revised by different people. And I absolutely love Linda Hill's interpretations, and these are the ones I'm looking at. Her website is brilliant. It's free, and you can check out any degree that you like out of those 360 degrees. So anyway, I'm looking at the degree for the full moon in Taurus. And one thing I would say is when you put in the degree, like 13, it will always get rounded up to the next number automatically. You don't have to round it up. Linda Hill's website will round it up for you, so you don't have to do that. So anyway, the full moon message about, from a Sabian symbol perspective is on the beach, children play while shellfish grope at the edge of the water. This symbol implies people and all living things existing together in peace and harmony. So that's that peace motif. They are playing, enjoying and living at the edge of the water on the beach, doing their own thing, getting on with their lives. People with this symbol often just want to get on with their own activities, enjoy life and nature. This is a lovely image of a live and let live attitude. Try taking some time out of the water. That could be like out of your emotions, and interact with others there. While the coming and going of the tide, people do what comes most naturally to them. Just be careful that you don't get out of your depth trying to be like others. Being self-sufficient, looking after one's own affairs, a sense of at one-ment with all forms of life, peaceful coexistence amongst beings on different levels of evolution. Now, this really does sound like what I was talking about, funnily enough. The idea of how can we be at peace irrespective of what's going on, irrespective of the fact that there appears to be really big changes in the way a lot of governments want to operate and how they see their citizens. This is a time when the markets are really quite unpredictable. And it's at these times when people are still worried. We're coming into winter, and I'm seeing messages about protecting yourself from viruses, and this is a time in human history, I think, where a lot of people are feeling almost bombarded with things to worry about. But this full moon is really asking you to be able to A, look after your own affairs, and B, be at peace. Find a way to be peace irrespective of what's going on. I always like these little bits in the Sabian symbols at the bottom where it kind of tells you what will go wrong if you are playing this energy in a negative way. It kind of shows what happens if it flips too far. And so one of the counter indications of this is like meddling in people's lives, restriction of play, being distracted, building sandcastles that eventually wash away, voyeurism, sunburn, I get that, and exposure to weather. It's like kind of stay in your own lane and feel at peace, as much at peace as you can. Now, with a full moon, obviously, as I showed you in the original picture, a full moon is always in opposition to a sun. So what is the Sabian symbol for the sun? Well, this is also looking interesting, isn't it? Telephone linesman at work installing new connections. This symbol implies the ability or the need to be able to connect in with people or situations, sometimes with tools and equipment, sometimes psychically. This shows networking along with the desire to talk to people or bring them together and improve communications. If people have been experiencing failure in fully expressing their thoughts, ideas, or emotions, there's nothing to be achieved just by worrying about it, but rather do something to repair the lines of communication. Doing this can cause surprising new connections with people linking up, even from surprisingly isolated places. Sometimes expert advice and help must be called in, and this often shows people who can do it. The nervous system, of course, like that is our communication system, isn't it? The internet, linking people from all over, reaching out to people, acupuncture, chatting, networking, mobile phones, emails, faxes, switchboards. So again, this is really talking about the flow. So, we've got that lovely flowing triangle in the water, although now Mars has just gone into Sagittarius. One of the things I mentioned in my Uranus and Mercury opposition video was, that I think the infrastructure for communications or electricity, the things that we use to make our communications and stay linked in, to me, I felt like this opposition, given that it's happening whilst Mercury's retrograde, I think this is showing us where our communication or our power or our internet might get affected or taken down, especially with Mars in opposition with Uranus as well. It feels like something could suddenly break and shift. Like maybe the weather takes something out. And of course, if we're thinking about our nervous system, if we're in a place of overwhelm, you could almost go into, like a place where nobody could reach you. Sometimes we'll break down a little bit, like the idea of us rocking backwards and forwards in a room on our own. I'm pretty sure most of us have not maybe done that, but we've had that feeling where we've gone so numb in a shock that it's like nobody can really reach us. It's as if our nervous system shuts down. And so I wonder about the internet and the systems around the world that might just shut down. So that's interesting. But it's also talking about the need to communicate and the need to be able to link from one person to another, to another, to another. So I do think these links and the breakdown of these links could be a big theme coming up. And of course, if that is going on, we also need to remember, how can we stay calm even if our communications are down? How can we stay calm? How can we stay peaceful in an emergency? Or how can we stay peaceful even if we've fried our own nervous system and, we go into shock? One of the counterindications of this is failing to repair communications involved in others' lives, gossip, being fickle, things getting out of control, cross lines, jammed switchboards, manipulation. So I do think the quality of communication is really important to us at the moment. Let's have a look at the asteroids then. So there were 4 that are showing up around the position of the full moon. And when I say full moon, I always include the sun, because I just see them as the same thing. They are working together. If that sun isn't in opposition to the moon, it's not a full moon. You can't have one without the other. So the closest we've got is Asteroid Memoria. She's not named after a goddess, I don't think. I tried a little bit of a search there. But she's associated with memory, power of recall, past events that we can learn from, and meeting people and know something. So to me, this is jogging our minds, jogging our memories. Is something from the past going to come up? Is there something coming up that's going to shock us? Have we recalled something in the right light? Are we going to revisit something that we've made a decision about? To me, this is also linking us into the ancestral history, like maybe your ancestral history, maybe our collective ancestral history. To me, it feels like that something from the past is coming up and seems relevant right now. And of course, Memoria is in a conjunction with the sun in Scorpio, and in opposition to this hopefully peaceful full moon. And so you could also read that our memories and our connection to ancestry is what's stirring us at the moment. And even if we're still stirred from the past, and maybe stirred and carrying the memories of the past, how can we maintain our peace? It's interesting because over the last month or so, I've been watching a lot of programs about DNA and long lost relatives meeting up, and the mysteries of the past. And I got very moved, actually, hearing about babies conceived in world wars and, being separated from their dads when they, went home. And it occurred to me, I was watching something about missing soldiers, whose bodies had never been found. And, the different groups around the world that help to locate bodies and repatriate them to their families, or, get that knowledge, get that connection linked in. And I spoke to my dad and I said, I know some of my relatives were in the Second World War. What can you show me? And a whole load of photos came through of my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my great-uncle who died in the line of duty. And so I do think there is this kind of theme of the memories coming up. And, what's his name? His name was right on the tip of my tongue. I just need to find his name. Hang on. I've just remembered Gabor Mate. So Gabor Mate has a lot to, talk about. He talks about how our DNA and our physiology that we're born with can be linked back to the trauma that our relatives, our grandparents, our great-grandparents had. And so any trauma that hasn't been resolved is like there's a signature of it that continues in the DNA. And so that you can have the DNA of somebody, you can have this element of trauma showing up in your life, but it's not actually yours. It's just something that's been carried in your ancestral family line. So again, Memoria, to me, it feels very relevant. You know, I've been noticing the past is coming up to play, and it feels like, wow, I wonder what's beneath it all. But that seems to be a theme, and I wonder how that's going to show itself in your life, and also how is that going to come up in the themes that we're hearing around the world. We've also got Elatus, and Elatus is one of the centaurs. And, you know, as a centaur, he's got a dual nature, half human, half horse or beast, you know, half man, half animal. And he was known for his free expression. There are different speakers that, you know, have written about, or astrologers who've written about him. And one of the things is he's freely expressed, and also killed by a poisoned arrow. And so there's this idea that, you know, and one of the ideas that I saw written about him was he could be a bit devious in communication. And so to me, this is really suggesting that the man and animal dual hybrid nature that we all might have, you know, there's different sides to us all, can be a bit like a poison chalice, you know, that we can be freely expressed is quite exciting, you know, that we can choose to do things as humans in a way that maybe animals have their life more scripted out. But of course, you know, when we're free to express ourselves, we can also be devious in communication. So I wonder where deviousness is going to come up as well as a theme, you know. Who knows how that's going to show up, but that is showing up. And then we've also got Urania in a square to the moon and the sun. And we've also got Varuna, also in a square to the sun. Now, Varuna is a trans-Neptunian object, or a dwarf planet. Varuna is known as the all-knowing god, is the closest of most of our objects in the sky, you know, that is like the almighty, all-knowing god. And one of the stories about Varuna is where we persist with something, we come into mastery consciousness. So it's like Varuna, wherever he's showing up, is showing us where we can be gifted with supreme sovereignty if we're practicing our well-earned skills. So Varuna is reminding us that we're not feeble, we're not vulnerable. In fact, we're sovereign beings. You know, Varuna is here to remind us, is to give us a real nudge. Hey, don't forget. You know, if you practice with your skills, you can be of mastery consciousness. You can absolutely do that. But of course, the knowing of that can cause some tension between our real lived experience and our real lived feelings at the time of this full moon. So if you're feeling vulnerable at the time of the full moon, you might ask yourself, well, why am I feeling vulnerable? You know, I'm a master creator. So it's not necessarily a peaceful knowing that you're a master creator, you're a master consciousness person. But it's still there to be recognized. And then Urania, I love Urania. She's an astrologer's asteroid. You know, she's a muse of astrology and astronomy. She sees patterns around her, and she's really caught in the heavens, and she's very curious, and she's full of natural intuitive insight. And so again, you know, we might be going about our daily lives, and we might be caught in different conflicts and trying to make our way in the world, and you know, we could get a little bit down in the dumps, and we might get a bit emotional. We might forget to be the peace that we absolutely can be. But Urania is here to remind us that even if we're feeling vulnerable at the time of the full moon, there are patterns around us. There is a whole language of stars and planets, which I'm guessing you're interested in because you're listening to this. But there's a whole language, not just sewn into the planets, but sewn into nature. There's water consciousness that people have learnt to read and divine with. There's all sorts of different ways we can tune into the patterns of life and be really rich in the knowing of life. And so we're not alone, even if it feels like we are absolutely alone. And how could we possibly feel comforted at the time of a full moon in Taurus? And yet we already have these patterns available to us if we could only just see them. And we are actually mastery consciousness. We just don't know it. And And maybe we could tap into the past and remember it. Maybe we've been told that we don't have that memory. Maybe we've been told that we are just this random speck on a random planet in the middle of nowhere. Maybe that story is true. Or maybe we are actually part of a lineage of beings that are fully conscious. And maybe now is the time when we come into that consciousness. Just my thought. Who knows? And of course, what would you be if you knew that you had all of the lines of communication throughout time and space? What if you knew you were a master, like if you knew that you were full of mastery consciousness? Well, you might not need the telephone linesman. You might be able to install your own connections or bring up the existing connections and make them work again. And of course, if you were able to do that, maybe you'd just be able to hang out and enjoy life and know that everything is provided for. So to me, as I'm looking at this, what I really get about this full moon in Taurus is actually, there's really chaotic astrology at the moment. And yet everything is around us kind of nudging us and saying, like, there's this here, there's this here. You can find peace right now. So that's why I want to deliver this message, and remember this degree, this 13 degree in the sign of Taurus is with us now for the next couple of weeks at least. It's a very strong degree. Look it up in your birth chart, see what's connecting to it, what's opposing it, what's squaring it, what's trining it. This full moon could actually help you unlock the secrets of why you're here. So that's where I want to leave that as almost like a question, how is peace seeded in your chart right now? How can you hold on to it? So I hope that's helpful for you. Have a fabulous full moon. And if you want to explore things with me, then just check out my details. All of my details are below. I've got a membership, and I can also work in consultation with you too. So have a great one and speak to you, connect in with you real soon. Lots of love. Bye for now.